joining in. Hello, Patricia, Jonathan. Excellent. We've got a good group on. So welcome today. I'll make a start. As people join us, they will probably just miss the preamble and the introductions. Today, our webinar is on knowing your ideal rate can be the foundation of improving performance outcomes. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk to this topic and then as part of today's topic, I'm also going to talk through a bit of a case study. And Trevor, I'd like to welcome my co-presenter, Trevor Harris, who's engaged a bunch of tradies in the background, and hopefully they'll behave themselves when Trevor's doing his talking. But Trevor has recently completed some work where ideal rate was, I guess, a cornerstone part of that work, and we're going to talk to that as a case study as we go through. So what we're trying to do today is add a bit of theory with some, I guess, real in-practice examples of how the theory is used, and hopefully you can see some parallels in your own business, in your own industry to do that. As we've said, today is a conversation. We're here to, I guess, give you some ideas and some insights about some of the work that we do and how hopefully it can help you. But also at the same time, we're really interested in your comments and questions. And my colleague, Philip Wong, will be looking at the chat box. So if you have any questions or comments or queries, Phil can monitor those and provide any answers on the way through. At the end, we can ask for any chat or questions, in which case we can hope to answer some of those. Okay, so today's agenda, we're first of all going to talk about what is ideal rate, why it's important, importantly, how to determine your ideal rate, and then once you know it, what can you do to make the most of it and how it can be a real benefit to your business and to your customers. So what is the ideal rate? Ideal rate, and this is a concept I really like. I think ideal rate is the achievable run rate when all parts of the process are in harmony. So this is your ideal operating conditions. It's what can be achieved within a time frame when everything goes to plan. I like this concept because it gives you once you have a really good understanding of your ideal rate and what makes it up and how to use it, you then really enable you to meet your customers' needs and business objectives, because it gives you that insight to know how to do things. Now, knowing it is one thing, using it properly is another, and that's why I think it's important that we've got Trevor on board today, because we can talk to some real examples of how we develop and create an ideal rate, but then how a real case examples of using it to actually get some really significant business improvement performance. I think, and as we go through the presentation today, think about it requires a we can be better mindset, and I think part of determining and using your ideal rate effectively is having that mindset top of mind, is recognizing that we can always be better. And if you have that lens, then it really does help facilitate the process of determining and then using your ideal rate and getting the most out of it. So knowing the visibility of your ideal rate, it's really important, I think. Once you understand how your business can operate when everything is in harmony and going to plan, what that does is, if you think about your customer needs and expectations, it enables you to be really precise in many ways in giving them a really good customer promise in terms of quality, service, and cost outcomes, because you have this real sense of understanding and certainty of what your business can do and how it operates and works. And so for a customer, knowing that you have a supplier or someone working for you that can tell you what you're going to get and deliver on it really consistently is really good, and it really does improve that customer experience and improve your business moving forward and enable you to grow much better, and it's really great for your brand. But more than that, it's being able to not just be able to let your customer know what's going to happen, but then it really does give you the opportunity to set really clear expectations for your team, whether you're working you're a CEO or whether you are a frontline manager or even a frontline team member. When you have a really good understanding, this is how our business works, this is how the levers are move and push and pull, these are the things that challenge us, it really enables you to set clear goals around what we can do, and more than that, your people will believe and do believe what is possible. So it does enable you to start raising the bar. And if we think about that, we can be better mindset. If your ideal rate and understanding of it is concise and well developed, you can iteratively continue to raise the bar and improve the way you do things and get a real competitive advantage. At the outset, you may be an organisation, and many organisations that we've worked with do have backlogs of work, and understanding how things work and operate is a really great starting point for eliminating any backlog. So if you're in a situation where you have backlog or things aren't working as they should, following the process and steps of determining and identifying an ideal rate is a really great starting point. Saying, okay, we have this backlog. We now have visibility of how to eliminate that because we have real confidence of what we're capable of, and therefore we should be able to get back on track and start pleasing our customers again. That in turn, moving forward in BAU, is that mad rush we get at the end of the week or the end of the month or quarter, whenever it is when things have to be done. It really does enable you to plan and schedule work much better. So if you're have a really great understanding of your ideal rate, that mad rush at deadline time really disappears. You can sort of at the end of the week or the month or whatever the time period is, start to wrap up and be really confident you're going to achieve your objectives. At a higher level within the organisation, knowing that how you work and how your business operate really does help with forecasting and then resource utilisation. How many people, how many machines, how much equipment we need can really be determined and defined by knowing that. Particularly, we've done a lot of work in places like mining environments where you have heavy equipment, moving earth or whatever, or equipment or developing and building and things. Knowing how many multi-million-dollar trucks you need operating on a day-to-day basis is really important. Similarly, if you're working in community housing, for instance, and knowing that we have this many tenants, we have this many rent reviews or this many queries come in, we have this many challenges, knowing what good looks in terms of meeting our tenants or residents' needs is really useful in terms of planning and organising how many people you need, particularly to today and there's a lot of talk, particularly coming out of COVID, of expanding community housing, and a lot of the community housing operators will be expanding their networks. How much bigger do we need to grow to take on these extra tenants and residents and that? And so knowing your ideal rate and how things work really does enable that forecasting planning to be much better. How does it do this? Well, it gives you real great visibility of your service level expectations. It enables you to set work standards that represent what is actually going to happen and to meet your customer promise. Not that we don't all have SLAs and work standards at the moment, but they're often built on rules of thumb, or they're built on worst case scenario, they're built on averages, and we haven't necessarily done the background work to say, so if everything does go to plan and we do operate really effectively, what are we capable of achieving? Now, that's what our standards should be set up in terms of how much effort and how long things take and what our promise to our customers should be. That gives you real power to actually start to get a real competitive advantage and really meet your customers' needs and expectations. So, as I said before, having real clarity and understanding your ideal rate gives visibility, enables you as a leader, as a manager, to have a real clarity, vision and purpose with your teams. Once you know how your business should operate when things are working, then your role as a manager or leader then as to providing support, direction and coaching becomes much, much simpler, because straight away your ability to identify when things aren't as they should or things can improve, you're there on the spot, you can be present with your teams, and you can really provide that coaching guidance as needed, because you really understand your business and how it works and can give really, really good support and coaching for your team. It's a real tool that then enables you to meet customers' needs, and on a day-to-day basis is working and managing your teams, having that visibility is really good. So when I was, and particularly leaders that I know that, and Trev will talk to this in a moment, is leaders that know how their business operates when it's operating well, become really good at what they do and getting really good outcomes for their results and for their customers. So Trevor, here's an opportunity for you to talk about a case study of where we've done some of this. Let's make some of this theory real.
Great, thanks, Greg. I'll start off with providing a bit of context first. So we engaged a top-tier financial institution, and we were working with their remediation team. At a high level, what the remediation teams do is they review financial products and if necessary, they remediate clients if they've been negatively impacted. And due to the current incidents with the Royal Commission, this is obviously on the forefront of many financial institutions. There's also the combined or compounded pressure in order to remediate these clients as soon as possible, as any of this financial return can essentially provide some relief to these clients. So we engaged the client or the executive manager late last year in November, and he highlighted two key problems he had or he wanted to help with. The first one was essentially, how do we increase the rate or velocity of completing cases for our clients in order to meet an ASIC or June deadline? And the second, one thing I'd like to add to that is the executive manager realized that we could potentially throw more resources at this problem. However, due to the lag it takes in terms of training up the people, it would be very costly and it wouldn't guarantee success for them in order to meet the deadline. So that's one of the caveats the executive manager understood, and he needed help with how do we actually increase the rate within our current workforce. The second aspect was to say, well, how do we now determine what is our true capacity or resource requirements to take on not only the current work, but more work that was planned to come down the pipeline. So realizing that more work is coming down the pipeline, how do I have confidence to talk to my seniors above to say, what are the resource requirements we need across the business? By the end of the project and working with the leadership team and the managers, we essentially, and as you'll see from the results, and we'll talk to them, we were able to increase their current rate or velocity by 85%. So that is, if we look at in terms of the right-hand graph, they were roughly completing around 27 assessments or completion or cases a week, and that was uplifted to 50. They needed to achieve a target of 40, but working through the business, they were actually able to achieve an uplift of 50. And we'll talk to some of the key aspects that helped facilitate that further uplift when we talk to around reducing lost time later on in the presentation. I'd also like to note that the payback for this project was achieved within 3 months. So that's one of the key trademarks for us within Cox & Alliance is we want to see operational uplift in the go-get of the project. The second aspect in terms of once we understood what the ideal rate was, we were able to develop a capacity planning tool, which then enabled them to understand what is their resource requirements, not only for the current work, but also for the future work. So high level, that's an overview in terms of the amazing results that are achieved by the team. I'll hand over back to Greg to provide some more details on the principles of how we actually achieve these results.
Thanks, Trevor. So I think there's a couple of things I'd like to point out before we move on. Is the ideal rate scenario can be, as you'll see here, these were people doing sort of caseload work. So this was a weekly kind of scenario where work cases were done on a weekly basis. This can equally apply where you have day-to-day type work or the cadence of time is different, but it applies very well, particularly in managing a caseload. So this is case workers as opposed to transactional teams. Often people think of things like rate around transactional type teams, but this same approach was applied to those people doing sort of case work and more project type work as well. So I think that's quite significant to think about. It is not just a rate, isn't just about transactions. It's about managing work regardless of the effort and duration required to complete each individual item. So how do you do this, and how did we do it? So the first step, as we said, is about knowing the work, and this is where you need to get into. This is how do we currently do things. This is really getting a real understanding, blow by blow. This is how stuff done. So it's looking at your end-to-end process and how to do that. But the key lens here, one is I mentioned before that we can be better mindset, but also is what is the customer's expectations of quality and service. It's one thing to look at a process, but you have to then look at it with that lens of how is this meeting the customer's overall need. In the case study Trevor's talking to, these cases had to be turned around much quicker than they were because people had to be remediated, they were owed money and those sorts of things. And so there's a real brand imperative and a customer imperative to get that done. Prior to that, things like internal SLAs and things, we can get things done and we can get green on our scorecard. But there's no being green internally if we still have a customer that's not happy. So I think look at our process, say, is the way we're doing things, transaction by transaction, are we going to meet our customers' expectations? The other key part is know your current production cost. And by cost, I mean things like effort, time, and resources. What is it costing us in terms of those things to get this done? And this is important because one is are we doing this as efficiently as we can for our customer? But two, if you're in a competitive environment, are we able to improve that and be much more competitive in our marketplace as well? So it's really to understand is the effort and time it takes to get things done, not just in sort of hands-on transaction time, but what is the wait time in between transactions and how are we able to shrink that down? So once you know your end-to-end process and the steps that happen and handoffs and things that take place, is you need to think about how actually good are we at doing this? And this is where you involve your team and broader team and stakeholders to really critique the way things are done and say, for this particular process or for this particular step, is this as good as we can be? So you'll see in the next sort of slides is things were taking 1 to 10 days for things to turn around. And in reality, those things can be done much faster and quicker. So this is applying that critical lens. So from a customer perspective, I want this done to the right quality and to the right service. Be really, really critical to this. This is when you need to step out of your this is the way we do it paradigm and say, okay, yes, it does take us a day to do this, but in reality, we should be able to do this in an hour or half a day or whatever. You'll know yourself what if everything goes to plan, how well can we do that? Are we always meeting quality needs? How much rework are we doing? Are we checking things too often? Are things getting rejected and turned around up? Are we churning work? This is where, as an organisation, you need to be really honest with yourselves, and this is why it's great to get the people that are doing the work to be involved in these type of critiquing processes to say, yes, we're good at this, but how much better can we be? And we really push yourselves and say, yes, there is a better way to do this. Let's look for it, and let's find out what that is. So step 1 and 2, they give you real visibility of your end-to-end process and then how good you are at doing that. So that then sets you up to understand where is the waste, where is the lost time, where are things taking longer than they should, are we double handling, are we checking things too often, is the approval process too cumbersome because our authority levels aren't high or right enough, are things taking too long because we don't have enough people trained in this particular skill, are our wait times too long because our logistics aren't set up correctly, where is the lost time, and quantify that. So you remember before I said know your production costs. Then you start to say, okay, what's the lost time? What's that costing us in terms of time, in terms of resources, and in terms of effort? You'll start to see that then becomes the opportunity. So we can be this much better, and it's worth this much to us. It's worth this much to our customers. It's worth this much to my people. We worked with one team where I talked about the mad rush of deadline at month end. They used to call their month end Armageddon. So one of the real benefits of knowing their ideal rate and getting their month-end processes completed was the staff weren't working till midnight on the 31st of the month. They were finishing at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and getting their weekends back. And so so there are those benefits in really understanding, saying, how do we rate ourselves better so we don't have these things that are costing us big time? And in that instance, it was costing our client a huge amount of overtime. So once you know what the lost time is, once you've done that critique process, that is now where you redefine what good looks like. Is what effort should things be taking? How long should things should they take? How do we ensure that we meet our quality and not need to do that rework? How do we ensure that service promise to our customer is met? And you define what that means from the customer perspective. Customers expect a shiny piece of a widget, and they expect it to arrive on the day or before that we promise them. So come up with an outcome statement that the customer, if you think back to what a customer testimonial might look like, the customer might say, company XYZ, they were awesome because I received my payment 2 days before I expected to. Now that's fantastic. Not, I have to ring them 5 times, my claim didn't get paid, they never got the information right, etc., etc. So think about that customer experience, and what good looks like is, when you think about the customer journey or resident journey or whatever it is you're doing, is what will they say about you, your product and your service that would define what good looks like? And how then do you and your team deliver that? And that then becomes your ideal rate. So we can do this to this quality in this space of time. And hopefully it's a better quality, better service at a lower cost than what you currently are. And that represents the opportunity to get better. And that's when you've determined what your ideal rate should be. So Trevor, how do we do this with your client?
Yeah, so in the start of the project, what we also look to do is, in terms of defining the visibility and also assessing what good looks like, we generally do a as-is review of what the current management operating system is of the business. And we'll go into a little bit more detail, high-level detail in the later slides of what this management operating system is or operating model is. But in that process, working with the managers, we essentially identified 3 key focus areas. And one that Greg's already highlighted to was the standards. And this is the expected time it takes to complete an activity. So what we saw in one particular area, that this standard was very singular and it wasn't based on in terms of types of complexity. So you might need to do an activity, but you can have multiple degrees of complexity. So you might get a simple task. That task could have further steps that need to be taken, which makes it medium, and further on it could be other actions that need to be completed to make it complex. What we identified in this area, and let's take an example of an assessment, was in the terms of they assume that all instances or all types of these activities were complex and therefore associated a half a day or whatever the time standard was to complete that activity. But what we actually really knew was 40% of the tasks did not actually fall within the complex category and therefore would take a lot less time. Therefore, this resulted in the pacing across the team, as we know that work expands towards available time. So we know if you give somebody 2 tasks to do in a day, essentially they'll expand their available time to complete those 2 tasks in a day, even if each task might take an hour and a half. On the other side, in another area, so in that area we had one, there is a standard, but it wasn't based on types of complexity. And the other area, and what good looks like, and in another area there was essentially no standard. So there was no clear view of how long activities would take. So that was one of the key focus areas, was understanding of what's the time expectation and what does good look like for those standards. The second one, which Greg's highlighted, was understanding performance metrics that relate to the customer. What we observed in this area was teams were focused on earning points. So for an activity, you might be given a certain amount of credit or points earned. So if I do one of these tasks, I get half a point, and I do 2 other tasks, I get 0.2 and 0.2. And what I need to do is I need to earn 1 point in a day. However, this resulted in team members focusing on points earning and not what is the outcome for the customer. So it wasn't about, well, how far have we progressed a case? It was, well, I've earned enough points today. I'm not too concerned if we haven't progressed the case. So it was really, that was the mindset that was across some of the teams around, we need to earn points and not what is the outcome for the customer. In another area, it was, well, we work on what is due for today. So if we have a payment or a letter that needs to be completed, the action was to say, well, it's only due tomorrow. I have capacity to do it today, but it's only due tomorrow, so we'll do it tomorrow. The third aspect was around the fair day's work. So that was, we noticed in some teams that, and this was through activity logs that the teams did prior to us coming on board for the project, that almost 1 hour of the day was essentially unscheduled. So they were essentially, there was 1 hour of unplanned work across teams in which they could be using that to complete further work or do other activities. So those were the key 3 areas that we identified with the management team through this as-is review, what that needed focus on. In terms of solving those problems, looking towards the standards, and this is where we'll highlight, and the devil's in the detail is, so we need to go through a process of what is the end-to-end process. So we had to do that, the process mapping. We had to build activities from that process mapping to understand what are the types of work that the individuals are doing. And then in that process, we also look to identify what is lost time activities. And this is a reference to lost time is anything that is not adding value to the customer in getting an outcome. And one of the examples we have in this case was we had one area who would do a review, or who would complete a task. We would have another person in that area review the task that was completed to check in terms of the quality and the outcome. And then that task was then handed over to the next area. what we identified in this process is that the following area that received the task then completed another review of what the reviewer had done. So we had the checker checking the checker, that was essentially causing a lag in providing an outcome to the customer. And that was changed and removed once we'd gone through this process. Changing the mindset in terms of them understanding that the focus is on customer outcome, and we need to view the business as a pipeline end to end. So there are multiple handoffs between numerous areas, but how are we managing or reviewing the performance end to end? So in terms of how long, the oldest actionable item for each area, and what's the turnaround time? How long does it take us for us to progress a case from one section of the pipe to the next section, and overall end to end for the customer experience? So also focusing on that first in and first out priorities. And then looking at using both the standards and understanding the pipeline of work and the priority around the customer, we helped the team develop planners in order for the team to manage their available time. So I had a reference to them having approximately 1 hour of the day unscheduled. So we worked with the management team to generate daily planners and enable them to ensure that they complete what we refer to as a fair day's work. So that is, plan your available work based on priority and to what available hours you have in the day. So with these new standards in terms of understanding the customer focus and also in terms of working toward the fair day's work, we were able to significantly reduce the turnaround time. So that's, you'll see on the right-hand side of the graph there, we reduced payments from 9 to 1 day. We reduced the letters from 20 to 1 day, essentially same day turnaround, and the customer contact from 94 to 20 days. So this is a significant reduction in the amount of waiting time for a client to get an outcome and essentially that potential financial relief. I'll hand over back to Greg just to talk more about how the team went around. One aspect is the tools and the tools and what we use in order to manage it, and then go into the next phase of the practices and behaviours.
Thanks, Drew. I think there's some really key points I picked up that, and hopefully the rest of you do as well. So one is the measures or metrics that the teams were using were unrelated to the customer expectations. So whilst they were all achieving the number of points that they needed to, you'll see from the graphic in front of us that the number of days it was taking for these things to be resolved was extraordinary. So everyone's patting themselves on the back for getting the right number of points. Still got a customer waiting, 94 days rather than the 20 days, which is the what good looks like answer, for something to be resolved. So that's huge. So one is, are your measures and metrics and the way you're organising yourselves fit for purpose in terms of the customer outcome? The other one is what are we using our time for effectively? Are we using the hours in the day effectively to achieve what we're trying to do? So do we have real visibility of what we're capable of doing, and therefore are we setting ourselves a high enough standard or benchmark to enable us to meet those customer needs? And I think knowing that is really important, and understanding your metrics are fit for purpose. You get what you measure. So if you're measuring points, you'll get points. But if you're measuring how quickly do we have a happy customer, then more than likely you'll have happier customers as well. So knowing your ideal rate is one thing. It's then how you use it is really, really critical. So often you do a lot of work, and we do a lot of work with clients, and we do a lot of things that Trevor's described. We map the end-to-end process. We look at activities. We understand what the lost time is. And then we have to change what we're doing. We have to say, okay, are our measures and metrics, or is the way we do things going to deliver this ideal rate? We used to, in the example that we've just provided, taking 94 days to get something done. If we said to someone, we're going to get this done in 20 days, well, that's not possible. It takes 94 days. That's how long it takes. But going through this process, we've been able to demonstrate in terms of what good looks like, you can be done in 20 days. So you need to change some things. Firstly, as we mentioned, the measures and metrics. Are the things we're measuring to help us give visibility of how work is progressing for our customer, are they right? Are they telling us what we need to do to be able to meet that what good looks like objective? When we do report and meet on these things, are they facilitating or timely enough to make those decisions? Is the cadence of our operating rhythm aligned to our ideal rate? I'd argue that in the instance where it was taking us 94 days to get stuff done versus 20, Our meeting frequency or communication frequency or reporting frequency has to change for us to be able to achieve that 20-day example, because things have got out of whack. We're not managing the work at the cadence required to meet the customer's expectations. So we need to change our work practices and how we do things. So when you look at your work practices, look at your measures and metrics, and there are many, and have that real customer lens on this again. As Trevor mentioned, when we focused on the customer, we were able to get letters down from 9 to 1 days. We were able to get our end-to-end time down from 94 to 20 days. Are our measures too broad? That is, they don't give us visibility of what's actually happening. And do we have too many? We get confused by the noise. Are they specific enough? Are our measures or indicators lagging? They've told us what's happened, as opposed to leading indicators, what's happening. So in case of the example Trevor gave, we had a pipeline of work. So knowing what's happening upstream enables us to prepare and get ourselves organised downstream. An example would be, for instance, if you're working in a new business team, and you've got applications coming in, and then you've got people setting up accounts, and maybe that's 2 separate teams. If the number of applications is increasing, then their workload for the people down the track is going to increase also. If we don't have visibility of that, we can't prepare and plan for it. Do we have our measures visibility to shine light on emerging issues? So if something's happening or is breaking down, do we find out afterwards, or do we find out before? So think about what it is that you do. Think about your end-to-end process. When is it good to find out what's going on so that you can plan and prepare for things? So, for instance, if you're doing rent reviews, for instance, and they have to be done by a certain point in time, do we have the information we need arriving in time for us to do the calculations to process the rent review? If there's a lag or delay of that information, your ability to achieve that review by the deadline is going to be diminished. So you need to know if the data's coming in. So you need a metric to say this stuff's coming in, as an example. Are your meetings and reporting, do you have a retrospective lens? Do you have a great black box, for example, in an airplane? Are you looking at what happened? Are you looking in the rear view mirror? Or do you have a dashboard of dials telling you what's happening, and therefore I need more people doing this, I need less people doing that, I need to get in contact with these customers because there's been an issue or a challenge. Or if you're in the insurance space, it started raining in Melbourne yesterday, so that means we're going to have more car accidents. So do I have enough people on the phones to take those claims as they come in? So think about your data that you're receiving, and is it enabling you to make decisions as things happen in real time versus, oh, that's happened last month, what can we do differently so it doesn't happen? Actually, it won't be this month because we're already halfway through this month, so for next month. So how do you get your cadence better so you can respond and fix things before they become issues? We talked a lot about operating rhythm and cadence. I think it's really, really important. Your cadence is when can I make a decision, and when do I need to be talking to people? When do I need data information? I need just the right amount of information at just the right amount of time that's indicative of what's going on for me to pull the right levers to make those decisions. Similarly, Trevor mentioned that what happened across the teams. Checkers were checking the work already checked by the previous team. So are we talking to our teams about what we've done in terms of the process, and are we not doing that duplication of effort? So you have that real critical lens of these. And if you don't apply this when you're looking at the way you manage the work, if you don't think about these things, you'll get your ideal rate, but you won't change the way you use it, and you won't get the improvement that's potentially you can achieve if you don't change the way you manage and work your team and use that. So Trevor, what did we change at your bank customer to make this work?
Yeah, so I think we spent a lot of time talking around in terms of the operating model around the standards, the key focus metrics around the customer. The second tier around that is around what we refer to as the management practices. So what we observed in the area was this inconsistent management practices. So some teams have huddles, some were daily, some were weekly. However, the effectiveness of these huddles was not particularly great in that they focused around providing general updates of what was going on with the business, or if there was maybe potential any blockers. It did not look to review in terms of what was the plan, what did we do, how do we go against that plan, and what actions are we going to take? So it's that iterative loop of continuous improvement that was not being executed across the team. The second aspect, in terms of how do the managers engage their staff, and this was potentially due to the result that this management team was fairly young and inexperienced. So one of the key aspects of the executive manager highlighted in the project was he wanted to uplift the capability of his managers in terms of how they manage the team and or the work in their team. So those were, how do we then from our side provide that on-the-job coaching in terms of how do they then uplift the performance in terms of engaging, enabling, empowering their workforce. So we've got it in a nice schematic there. Is on the left-hand side we have is essentially the operating model of how do we forecast work to understand the volumes and complexity, how do we plan that work, essentially convert it into hours or workload, how do we match that workload to available resources, and that's the capacity planning side of the operating model. And then what we get is to the coalface is how do we actually now execute and deliver the outcome for the customer. So how do we schedule it to our workforce? How does it get implemented and executed in terms of how do we support them through that process and remove any blockers? And then lastly, review and evaluate performance on the right metrics to say, what did we learn? What are we doing good? What are we going to do differently in order to achieve a better outcome? So we went through the phase of updating their management practices. So looking at it and understanding that we need to create an end-to-end view of the management practices. So each team across the pipeline of work would have a morning huddle. They would then gather that necessary information to provide further detail to the executive manager in their morning huddle, and then there would be check-ins with the managers with their team members to identify whether there were any blockers, where they needed support, and whether they needed to take action in order to ensure the priorities for the day were executed or met, or if actions needed to be taken at whichever level, either at the manager level or escalated to the executive manager level. And then an end of day review is to say, well, how well did we go and did we hit our targets for the day? The last level was really the operational performance review, and this is where we bring it all together to say, well, let's look at a longer horizon. How are we going in terms of weekly trends, in terms of meeting customer commitments? What's up ahead? What's coming down the pipeline in the coming weeks? And what actions or decisions do we need to look to take now, or take further actions against to be prepared for what's coming in the pipeline? So one aspect was getting a consistent operating cadence across the business, and then it was also an increased frequency. So there was the view that my team members are highly skilled. I don't need to check in with them. I have an open door policy, and that's something, working with the managers and coaching them, that they realized that there were so many missed opportunities that they missed by not engaging with their staff and checking in with them to see how things were going. I must add that all these changes were built upon us having a high engagement and collaboration, not just for the managers, but also with the SMEs and the team members, in order to make it sustainable across the team.
Thanks, Joe. So I think that really should demonstrate how much an organisation had to change the way they worked. But the foundation for that was knowing the ideal rate. This group of managers had much more visibility and understanding of, of what was required on a day-to-day basis and what good looked like. So it enabled them, rather than just having an open door policy and my team will come when they need help, is being able to recognise when help was needed or required, because those expectations were clear. They knew what they were capable of doing, and as soon as things started to drift a little bit, they were able to act. And the reason they were able to act is because their cadence and their operating rhythm changed to enable them to be much more tuned in on a day-to-day basis, all the way up to quite high levels in the organisation as to what was going on. And so as an organisation, they had real confidence that by the end of the month that their targets were going to be achieved, because at every stage through the weeks, through the days, through the weeks, they knew they were achieving what they needed to do to meet their monthly targets and goals. So it really became a foundational enabler to having a much more disciplined way of working. In order to do that, as Trevor mentioned, changing the way you work is not easy. And I think it's from the start is when we talk about that mindset, we can be better mindset. But I think that the key, Trevor, it sounded like is getting everyone involved, the team, the stakeholders. It's very hard to change the way we work as much as this group did without being involved and having that engagement at that frontline level. People need to be able to believe that these new work standards are achievable. They're capable, and they know that, and they need to know that they can achieve them. And the best way to do that is involve the people that are doing the work to help you develop and actually get them to develop standards, because they'll know that they can go from 9 days to 1 day for a letter, or 94 days to 20 days, because the work they've done has demonstrated that. Defining what good looks like, that's really important. We can never forget the customer piece in terms of quality, service and efficiency. What they did is they had the ideal rate, but they then introduced a set of management practices and tools that enabled them to use that information for good and to achieve what they needed to do. They understood handoffs. They understood, so they involved and engaged other parts of the business. So I think there were 2 or 3 teams involved in this. Each knew what the other was doing, and so that collaborative process, because there's very few organisations where a team works in isolation, where they're able to share and give and take, and they each understood how they impacted the other. So, in summary, okay, so to determine your ideal rate, so first slip, get your headspace right, have the mindset, know the work end to end, determine how good you are at currently getting that work done, identify the lost time or the waste or the things that aren't working through those critique sessions and using a team to do that. Then redefine what good looks like. Remember, this is all done with the customer lens. Think about how's the customer going to endorse us and talk of us in glowing terms. And that's what good looks like. We turn this stuff around quickly to the right quality. That then becomes your ideal rate. Then if that changes the way you operate, which it most likely will, is you need to change the way you manage that. So it's similar to the process of looking at your end-to-end work process. What's your end-to-end management process, and how does that support achieving this ideal rate so you can get everything working as it should in harmony? And then change the way you work, engage the team and introduce those changes and get them involved and participate within that. As I said at the start, you start with the we can be better mindset. Keep that mindset, have that Kaizen approach of continuous improvement. You will improve, but there's no reason why applying the same process on a consistent basis, you can't get iterative improvements over time and continue to improve and get better. So quickly, it sounds simple, but it does go wrong. I think, as Trevor indicated, the devil is in the detail. We spoke about the fidelity where it counts. So is knowing the detail of specifics. I think Trevor gave some great examples where one team was doing quality checks and then the next team was doing a quality check straight away afterwards. Our metrics weren't right. We were patting ourselves on the back for getting points, not achieving customer outcomes. So you need to get into the detail where it matters. Now, sometimes you don't need to get into the too much high level of detail. If your standards are within a few percentage points of being accurate, that's well good enough. But as Trevor mentioned, if it takes multiple different ways to do things, maybe you need to slice and dice your work to understand, okay, simple things take this amount of effort, more complex things take that amount of effort. So get the fidelity right. Determining ideal rate, often we don't see the inefficiencies, so your fat gets built in, or we allow too much for what if. But what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? My answer to that is how often do things actually go wrong? Manage the exceptions when they happen, but your ideal rate should be when everything goes to plan, not if everything goes to plan and a whole bunch of what ifs built on top. Understand what the variation of the work is. If you do it too broadly, then you don't necessarily catch the variation. You need to be aware of that. If you're too narrow, then you might miss variation that does have an impact. So understand what the natural variation of the work is when understanding and setting your standards to determine your ideal rate. Once again, your ideal rate should be based on the majority of cases where things do go to plan and things work. Natural variation due to customer requirements or customer needs, they might be separate activities that you manage separately, or you create a separate standard or rate for those different scenarios. So understand the scenarios and don't make it too complex. Same way, don't oversimplify. finally, I think it's about the success. Trevor, your bank client, has this become a way of life? Have they changed the way they do things, and what's happened after we left?
Definitely. So I think it's definitely a behavioural change, and I've had we left the business in March, and I've had prior catch-ups with them in June. And in terms of, they've taken ownership of what we helped them build. So they've extended on what we've done in terms of further reporting to provide greater visibility, added significant trends, looked at additional metrics. Their performance is actually also uplifted. So when we left the business, they were sitting around 50. They've further reduced lost time, driven efficiencies, and now they've been up to almost 60 cases a week. So the fact that they've driven more continuous improvement in terms of driving better customer outcomes, it shows the sustainability of the project.
Yeah, and I think that's we often do projects and things that, and every organisation would have projects that they have an initial bang and they don't continue on. I think ideal rate is a really great way of ensuring stability and sustainability, because it becomes, this is the way we do things around here. We know this is, when everything goes to plan, this is what it looks like, and it becomes a way of life. And I think if you need to think about on all these improvement projects is, how do we make this a way of life? How do we make this is the way we do things around here? And that's a great example, I think, Trevor. It's rare that you have a huge improvement like that and then go away and come back, and it's almost a step change again, which is fantastic. Yeah. So just shows that they've really bought into that. And so I guess my final message to the group here is to make it a way of life, and that comes from the top. So you as leaders and managers of your teams is this needs to be something you're working with your teams together and make it the way of doing things all the time. Now we're out of time. If there's any further, like I said, there's been plenty of chat going on in the chat box. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them in now, and we'll do our best to answer those. If you otherwise, thank you very much. And if you have to drop off, you can, but I'm happy to take some more questions. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you all.